Soon the darkness of the void gave way to more and more blue as they dropped into a clearly daytime area of the world they were invading. Conquering. Liberating? Attacking! He nodded at that last word choice. Why they were attacking was no concern of his right now. He just knew they were attacking and he'd do them proud. He'd do himself proud. Today he'd become a commando. The music in his ears was really beginning to pump him up too, his head nodding a little to the heavy beat being blasted into his ears over and over. The orchestras he was used to would be far more interesting with sounds like these. Then he sat up a bit straighter, as the music seemed to shift over to something like the orchestra he was used to, a chorus in the background that accented the piece to sound rather serious. But then the human instruments started up again. Realizing his rifle wasn't ready, he chambered around and then flipped the fire selector to fully automatic. He could see the tops of tall yet skinny trees blowing in the wind just as he realized they were about to land. His hand slapped the release for his straps, and he was charging out the door just as the music's building crescendo turned into some human phrase he couldn't make out, just as he dropped out of the door of the craft. The heavy bass of the music accompanied his 4-foot drop to the ground as he'd charged out a little too early, but he tucked and rolled as he landed just like his drill sergeant had shown him. Then he was jumping up, rifle at his shoulder. Ahead of him he saw 2 Desvians staring at him open-mouthed, weapons in their hands but not raised. His finger pulled tight, and he felt the rifle jerk in his hands. A string of impacts running up the chest of the first Desvian while he turned and hit the second just after. The 2 hostiles were dropping and he was already running forward. From what he could see, they were at the edge of a ramshackle town built along a cliff overlooking a cove. There was a hill ahead and above him, with several large antennae on top, which he figured must be the communication tower they wanted. There was a door ahead of him that the 2 hostiles had been guarding, so he aimed for it. He'd get close, stack up to the side, and kick it in backwards like he'd been taught. Well, that was his plan. As he ran forward, he misjudged how much to lift his foot up over one of the bodies, and it caught, sending him tumbling forward. He tried to catch himself, but his forward momentum was too great, and he just twisted in time to ram into the door with his shoulder breaking it open as he fell to the floor on his back. From this position, he saw another hostile inside start to turn and aim at him on the floor. However, Lucky was faster and brought his rifle up, shooting the next hostile from his position on his back. Rolling over and climbing back to his feet, he noticed the heavy music beat had stopped and changed to a chorus once more of humans chanting at him, asking if he could see. See what? He pressed his shoulder against the far wall next to another window and peeked out. From here he could see rooftops and bridges connecting them stretched out ahead of him. Hostiles were pouring out of hatches and doorways all around now as he counted 24 hostiles at least. The music kept building in his ear though, and he grit his teeth. Mother was depending on him. The eyes of the fleet were upon him. He reloaded his weapon then, and tried to plot out across the rooftops and bridges before the music's building crescendo finally got to him. With the loudest war cry he could muster, he turned and jumped out of the window, firing as he dropped to the ground. He clearly saw 2 of the Desvians running across a bridge stagger and fall before he hit the rooftop beneath the window he'd jumped out of. Then he was running. Green energy bolts began to fly past his head as he ran forward, then firing a bit more wildly than he intended as he kept moving. He had made it across the first bridge and slid down into cover behind a shoddily made brick chimney. He could hear the soft splat of the energy bolts impacting against the other side. He started to twist to get up and move forward, but then had to quickly toss himself flat as an energy bolt flew right through the place his head had just been. More fire was being concentrated on his cover as he quickly crawled back behind it. Perhaps he hadn't thought this through as carefully as he should have. His back to the chimney. Still he looked right and left, and then saw another hostile trying to flank him across one of the side bridges, but he fired first, and the Desvian's shot went up into the sky as he dropped to the floor. Even so, Lucky was trapped. He could hear more energy bolts hitting the roof around him, and even the music seemed to be winding down. With that, he felt worried, as if the music had been powering his run so far and without he wouldn't make it. He tried to lean and look around the edge of the chimney, but more bolts just slammed into it, making him pull back. Still, the music faded and his hand moved down to change the channel. He needed to call for help. The music was over anyway. Just as he was reaching for the box on his vest to change the channel, he heard a strange noise in the distance. He'd heard it before. What was it? That's when the world around him exploded. He found himself tumbling through the air, arms flailing as he lost his grip on his weapon, and he heavily landed on the roof a few feet away in a pile of dust and crumbling bricks. He groaned out heavily and lay there, pain spiking through his ribs as he tried to push himself up. His breathing was more labored now, but just as he was about to get truly desperate, the music changed. For a moment, he blinked away the dust, laying in the debris still. Then he began to slowly nod to the tune. A human started singing, but the words were coming too fast for him to understand. Even so, he kind of got the feel of the song. He started to feel more pumped up, as if the human music had some sort of key to getting him fighting better. He lay there a little longer than he likely should to try and catch his breath, but it began to chant at him to get up. Seeing no other choice, Lucky obeyed the lyrics telling him to get up, so he did finally get up to his feet. When he turned around, there were 3 hostile Desvians arrayed before him, weapons leveled at his chest. They were shouting something, but he couldn't hear them over the music. He wasn't sure where his rifle was, and they were all aiming at him anyway, but as the music kept playing, he started shaking his hips side to side. Then he let his tail sway and lash as he began to dance. The 3 frowned and looked at each other for a moment, obviously confused by his sudden dancing. But then he spun, and in one movement drew his sidearm with his right hand, flicking the safety off as he jammed it up under the chin of the hostile on the right. As he pulled the trigger, he was already looking at the one on the left, jerking his knife free with his left hand to send it flying into that Desvian's throat. Even as his eyes went wide and his fingers moved to the blade now buried in his throat, Lucky pulled his head back and brought it slamming forward against the hostile in the middle, who had been too shocked to fire. Both Lucky and the hostile staggered back then, each clutching their head from the pain of their heads colliding. It hurt worse than Lucky had expected, but he recovered first and brought his pistol up, slamming it into the side of the hostile's head, knocking him out as he crumpled to the floor. With all 3 down, Lucky slowly blinked, trying to clear up his vision after the headbutt. He saw his rifle a few feet away and picked it up as he made a mental note to try and not hit people with his face anymore. The music was still loud in his ears, though, reminding him to keep moving. He looked around and noticed there were far more dead Desvians up here than there had been when he'd last checked. Running forward, he then saw what had blown up the chimney earlier. There was a 3-man crew around a heavy impulse caster, a rooftop away from him. They were reloading it, but he didn't see a bridge between him and them. Taking a deep breath, he put his head down and ran as fast as he could before jumping the gap between buildings, tucking his legs so he could roll as he landed and jump up to his feet. However, he'd overestimated the strength of the poorly made roof he landed on, and as he shoved his weight down to try and jump up, he instead fell through the roof to the floor below. He landed hard and his knees screamed at him as he stumbled forward from the landing. But rather than get distracted, he brought his rifle up and fired at the ceiling above him, expending an entire magazine into the area of the roof he figured the emplacement was. Hoping that killed the gun crew, he started to reload just as 4 more Desvians rushed into the room he was in. They all looked at each other for perhaps a second, when dropped his rifle and pulled his sidearm back out, firing at the first and then the second. He saw the slide on his pistol stick open as he realized he was out of bullets. And just as he expected, the 3rd and 4th hostiles to shoot him, a giant armored hand burst through the wall behind the 3rd and jerked him right out through the new hole in the wall. Both he and the last remaining hostile stared in shock at the hole in the wall for a second and then turned back to each other. Lucky pulled his arm back and tossed his gun at the last hostile in the room, who reflexively lifted his hand and his weapon to block the object. This gave Lucky time to charge him, driving his shoulder into his opponent's chest and slam him back against the wall. Lucky reached for his knife only to realize he'd left it in another Desvian's throat. With his focus distracted for a moment, Lucky had to just try and grab the Desvian's weapon, which was pinned between them. Just as Lucky tried to pull back, he felt the other Desvian's leg hook his, and he fell back, shoved to the ground with the hostile landing on top of him. He grunted heavily and gasped as he lost control of the rifle. The pirate raised it up, and Lucky thought this might be his end. The side of the other Desvian's head exploded in a red mist and chunks of skull and brain. The dead assailant slumped off of him, but before he could get up, Jefferson appeared, and Lucky had to blink as multicolored bright lights were shining and spinning around the room from some sort of orb on that pack of hers. "Lucky!" She dropped down, straddling him on the ground as she held the nozzle over his head. "Top off!" He opened his mouth wide as the orange liquid gushed forth, and he could only gulp down so much of it before he was gasping out, muzzle and face getting soaked in it. "You did good!" she was yelling out before pulling the clips from his ears just as he thought a new song was coming on. "The rest are up ahead, clearing out the tower. Mother's outside. The fight's over." The human got up off of him, dragging him to his feet and then supporting him as he staggered forward. Between the fighting and the drinking earlier, and the more drinking just now, his head was truly spinning. "Whoa there!" She laughed as she helped him walk down the hall and out a door. He found himself on a balcony of sorts that ran the length of the building and around the corner. They were at the edge of the cliff now, looking down over the cove and the rest of the town below. He saw Mother holding something up to her eyes at the corner of the balcony, the hole she'd punched through the wall just behind her, but he didn't see the Desvian she'd dragged through it. When he carefully peered over the edge of the railing and at the long drop below to the ocean, he figured that might be where that particular enemy had ended up. "I do good, Mom?" he asked, and she pulled the object from her face, some sort of visor. "You did good, kid." She reached out, then perhaps to pat his shoulder or rub his head, but at the last second he tried to lunge forward to give her a hug, and instead ended up getting her hand jammed into his stomach. He had half a second to gasp, turn, and lean over the railing as he puked. Lots of that orange liquid coming back up. "Oh, sorry, Lucky." He felt Mother's hand rub his back then. He wanted to say something, but with his head swimming and the adrenaline of the battle still in his system, his body was more focused on other things, like puking some more. As he leaned back over the side, he heard both Mother and Jefferson laughing, each patting and rubbing his back as they said soothing things. He felt good in that moment in some strange way. "Christ, Jefferson, did you just pour screwdriver all over his face?" he heard Mother ask as he tried to keep his stomach contents inside his stomach. "Yeah, sorta just now. I figured we wanted him even more fucked up for the party. I'm looking forward to tropical drinks with little umbrellas in them. Where do you think Alexa even got those?" Knowing her, she's held on to them since the war. Lucky wanted to say something again, but as he straightened up and wiped his mouth off on his sleeve, Mother spoke first. "So why did you jump out early?" "I was last before. This time first. Also music." They laughed again and he smiled at the sound. Very battle-good music. His words were getting jumbled, but he was trying hard to not slur anything, even as his head spun a bit still. "Yeah, I'm sure for you those are some blood-pumping beats." Jefferson flipped a switch on the side of Pack, and the sphere stopped spinning and shining lights all over. "So, shall we go down and check out the beach?" "You can. I'm going to head up to the communication tower and see what we've got to work with. Lucky I might want you up there so you're with me still. Want to top off?" He saw Jefferson raise the nozzle, but he quickly shook his head and then had to lean on Mother, as the head shaking made him lose his balance. The humans laughed then, but Jefferson nodded. "We'll teach you how to do a keg stand tonight, Commando." He grinned as she said that. "I'm Commando," he realized then. "Yes, you are," Mother said, and he laughed and hugged her side, which was still awkward in her armor, but for now he seemed to care less. "All right, Commando, let's go get your guns." She walked him back into the building he'd just come out of, and he saw his pistol first where it had landed after being deflected by the Desvian. When he tried to lean down and pick it up, he lost his balance and sprawled out across the floor. As he grabbed it, he felt Mother's big hand pick him up by the back of his vest and set him on his feet. "There you go. You're pretty drunk, aren't you?" "Yes, Mother?" He nodded and then looked up at her and squinted as he tried to think of what he was going to ask, but instead just smiled and laughed, which made her laugh too. With her help, he stumbled over to his rifle and picked that up as well, so she could guide him to the tower up on the hill they still needed to get to. As he slowly stumbled his way up the various stairs and across other rooftops guided by Mother's helpful hand, his brain kept spinning around. But then it stopped on a thought that he had to ask. "Why am drunk?" Mother laughed at that. "Because we've had you drink a ton of alcohol, likely without much food in you. And then it's hot out, and you just exercised a ton, which doesn't help." "No." He looked up at her as she basically kept him walking by gripping his torso with her arm to keep him from stumbling or straying from her chosen path. He blinked hard a few times and then just left one eye opened, keeping the other closed, which seemed to help somehow. "Like, for you make drunk, me." "Why did we get you drunk?" she asked, and he nodded. "And music," he then added as he felt the urge to dance to the tune still stuck in his head for a moment. But he got over it when his feet decided not to listen. Because this is what we do. We need to see how Desvians respond to certain conditions with battle. Booze, drugs, music, all of it will be tested over time. It's our job to make sure that our commandos don't go mad with the stress of battle. War sucks. I'm sure that's true for Desvians as much as humans. Those of us still here are well adjusted to it, but you're new. So we fuck with you to get an idea for how battle stress affects you and the others. How much time between battles you need. How to keep your morale up. How fucked up you can get and still fight. She looked down at him then as he looked back up at her with one eye. She laughed and gave him a little shake. "Does any of that even make sense to you right now?" He looked up at her, taking a few seconds before realizing he needed to use his mouth to talk. "Yes, makes sense, but why me? I'm not Desvian." She laughed, and then that made him laugh, though he wasn't sure why. "Yes, you are." "No, I'm not. I'm lucky," he replied, which made her laugh again, which in turn caused him to giggle. He liked the sound of humans laughing. It was infectious. "We'll talk about it more when you're sober." He frowned a little at that. "But how can I be sober? I just told you. I'm lucky." She laughed yet again, and he smiled and then laughed as she kept laughing, though he wasn't sure what they were talking about anymore. He just leaned against the human, tail lashing about behind him happily. He did know one thing as he kept hold of Mother with one arm and his rifle with the other. He was a commando now, and he wouldn't be anything else ever again, now and forever. He wanted to relish this moment. It was just hard with the way the world kept spinning around him. "I like you, Mom." "I like you too," she replied and gave him a squeeze with her one arm around him. "Welcome to PsyOps Commando." His grin was as wide as it could possibly be now when he heard that. "We should celebrate," he muttered as they kept moving. "How should we celebrate?" He paused then and looked around, leaning his rifle against a nearby wall so he could reach into a pouch on his vest and pull out the gift from earlier. "Benny! Bend! Benny Straw!" He held it up and Mother laughed again. "No more booze for you until we get you some food. One battle and already you're a party animal." She shook her head and let out an amused snort at the sight, but Lucky changed which eye he had open as he frowned up at her. "No, I'm lucky." He looked confused for a moment, and then just started laughing, which made Mother laugh and shake her head as she dragged her newest addition to the team up another set of stairs. "You sure are,"